So, this is a video I've been promising to make for Stu and Chris for flipping ages, but never got around to it. So, I've got around to it. We're going to do a short hop flight from Birmingham to Edinburgh. The reason I'm doing the full flight is so I can show Stu the FMC and some of the more in-depth systems of the better 737s, so we can get an idea of that. And we're going into Edinburgh because it's the easiest to show how you do an ILS approach in the sort of way that FSX does. So we're here at a gate in Birmingham in a 737 at one of the gates. So there we go, there's our 737. With the gate all hooked up there. So, we're going to do it from a cold and dark setup so you can see some of the intricacies of what we're doing here. And I'll also show you some of the other tools that I'm using. First of all, this one here, Sim Toolkit Pro, which is absolutely superb. And also we're going to be using a flight plan from SimBrief. Now I thoroughly recommend SimBrief because it makes planning your flights so much easier and so much more realistic as well. So I've programmed in flight number 1, a Boeing 737-800, call sign train 1, from Birmingham to Edinburgh, and using EGCC as an alternate, which is Manchester of all places. And we're going to have a cruise of flight level 240, which is 24,000 feet. Should take us about an hour with about 15 minutes actually in the air. And it's also told us what fuel we'll need and what our weights are going to be, and you'll see how that's extremely useful if you're using one of the better simulations of 737 or any aircraft for that matter. And it's got our full online flight plan here, the OFP. Tells us our trip fuels, our reserves, the fuel that's loaded to get us to our alternate destination, how much fuel we should have on takeoff, how much fuel we should load in total, the weights of our passengers, how much cargo we're carrying, all that good fun. And what that does, if you use Sim Toolkit Pro, it also automatically loads it into there straight for you, so you can keep track of your flight, and it will show you all sorts of handy information on your flight. Okay, so we'll fly that one now, and there, as you can see, it's imported our online flight plan and also given us all that good information that we'll need to start it up. So that's that. We're also going to use this paid tool. Now this is quite an expensive tool, so straight away I don't expect you to be using this, but you will see that it becomes extremely handy, and again it will just allow us to import our flight plan straight from sim brief. Okay, so it's brought it all in there. Okay, so there's our plan. And very handily gives us an ATC ribbon there. We won't be using that on this flight because we're not online. This is completely offline. But you can see us here down at Birmingham, and it shows you all our route and waypoints all the way up to Edinburgh. Okay, so let's go back to the sim and actually get the aircraft loaded. And we completely what we call cold and dark. So let's first switch on our batteries, and that lights the aircraft up. And let's put an external power unit. Set our chocks and open the doors. And it's not letting us load anybody until we arm our emergency light system. And something else as well. Connect our ground power unit. And also disconnect our. So let's open the cargo and the entry doors. Okay. Now all the systems have lit up. I'm just going to get rid of my yoke there for a second. But you notice they don't seem to be aligned. That's because we don't just have a GPS system that's constantly connected like in the default aircraft. In real life you have what on Boeing is ADIRUs, and Airbus called them ADIRs, but it's basically an inertial navigation system that works alongside the GPS and alongside the radio navigation to make the navigation absolutely precise, and they have to be warmed up and aligned before you do anything. So we'll start that process by switching them on. Let's have some cockpit lighting as well. Okay. Now what we also have is the flight management computer, which I'll bring up here. And that brings us to our ident page, and as we can see there, it's got the right identity of the aircraft, 737-800 with a 26,000 pound engine rating. The nav data is all correct, and it's asking us to enter our IRS position. Now that is our current position where we're sitting at the gate. So we'll go to our POSINIT, which is position initialize. Now you can see there that it's got a last position, which is all should match up with what we've got as our GPS position here. If we just clear that out, and we'll select into our scratch pad our current GPS position, go back to position initialize, and you can see, yeah, those marry up quite nicely. So we'll set that there. Our reference airport is EGBB. There you go, that should be quite close. It's within 3 decimal points of where we're actually at, so that's close enough. I mean, and you can see now that the displays have all aligned with the GPS, so it's now got a position, so we're good on that front. So that's the first stage of preparing the aircraft done. So we'll actually load up our aircraft now. Okay, so we'll actually put some payload in. The first thing we want to do is put some fuel in. And if we go back to Sim Toolkit Pro, you can see that we've got all that useful information here. So our block fuel is the total amount, so we need 5,920 kilograms. 5920, and enter that. Okay. And our payload is going to be, let's just whack in a load of passengers. Okay. So that should be 160 passengers and 300 kilograms of cargo. Now, as if this all becomes important for 2 reasons. One, before the aircraft takes off, it doesn't know the distribution front to back of the weight in the aeroplane. So this tells us where our center of gravity actually is with those calculations there. And we can also do some calculations about exactly how the aircraft will fly given the conditions that we've got, if we need to do that beforehand. Okay, so going back to our FMC, you can see there, oops, you can see there, if I just use this tool here, it's now loaded the fuel up in there. I should use a different colour. can see it's loaded our fuel in. Switch the other FMC on. Now we can go about planning our route. Now it knows we're going from EGBB, so we'll put that in as our origin. And it doesn't know where we're going, so we'll put in our destination, EGBH for Edinburgh. And I do have a company route in, which I've got from SimBrief. SimBrief is brilliant. Once you've got it set up, it will automatically load in the plan for your flight directly into your FMC, and we can just GBP H01. Enter that into the company route. We'll call this UK V1. Okay, and then we activate that, and you have a little execution button. And there we go. So now, if we have a look at our route, direct to Leuven, then direct to TNT, which is Trent, then take N57 to Pol, N601 to Inbip. And that's our route. So we've got the actual route planned in now. Now the next stage is our performance initialization. Now we've loaded up the aircraft and we know what our loadings are. What we don't know, or we didn't know before we looked at our flight plan, oops, not that one, that one, was what our cruising altitude is going to be, but that should be somewhere in there as 240. Where is it? Just release Birmingham to Edinburgh. Weather observations. Average wind. It's got a cost index there of 26. Where's here we go. 240 flight steps for our climb is just straight to 240. So if we put that in here, okay, now it should be able to detect our zero fuel weight, and it's also given us our gross weight and our centre of gravity cruise level, which is 8%, taking into account how much fuel we burn off to take off. We're going to ask for it to have at least 1 tonne out of the 5 tonnes or the 5.5 tonnes that we've got as a reserve when we touch the ground at Edinburgh or Manchester if everything goes wrong. We've got a cost index, I'll show you that again. Cost index there, 26. So 26 is our cost index, and that's basically how efficient do you want the aeroplane to be in the climb and descent phases. And that I believe is quite a high cost index, so we won't worry too much about how much fuel we burn. So we're happy with that. Tell it that all the fuel is designated for this plan. Okay. So that's basically telling you how it's going to calculate everything. It's going to use a minimum speed of 100, obviously. That's even below stall speed, but a maximum speed of 340 or 8.2 max. So it's going to be a fairly quick flight. Okay. Next, our N1 limits, which is basically how much of the engine power to use on takeoff and climb. We can derate it here, so if we want the aircraft to be more efficient or less noisy on takeoff, we can set it to that. I'll leave it at 26,000. I'll have full power because we don't want to mess about too much. Okay, next, takeoff. Now we can't actually calculate this yet because we haven't decided which runway we're using. So we're going to go to the departures page, and usually we would get this actually from the airport. It would be either on the automated information system, the ATIS, or you would get it from the ground controller when you call for your initial clearance. So let's have a look at what that's going to look like. Okay, so if we go to our electronic flight bag here, we can go to the departures page. Okay, and what that will do that right. Okay. Now you'll notice there 33 as the runway has already been highlighted. I'll show you why that is. You always have to take off and land into the wind. And you can see here there's an 8-knot tailwind on runway 15 because the wind is, at the minute, it's coming from a bearing of 320 at 8 knots. And generally speaking, most airliners do not like a tailwind of anything more than 10 knots. So an 8-knot tailwind is pushing it a little bit, so it's saying you can, but verify it. But yeah, at the minute it's assuming that the takeoff and landings are all going to be from 3.3. So if we go back to our procedures, yeah, 3.3 is where we're going to be taking off from. So that's going to be, if we go here, if we just get rid of that, that means we're going to go from there and take off in that direction. Okay, now we also have some SIDs. At most decent sized airports you will have SIDs and stars. SIDs are standard instrument departures, so that's a route out of the airport onto your flight plan, and a star is a standard arrival pattern, and that's a route from your airways down basically to the approach, the ILS, or whichever approach system you're using. Now here we have a choice that tells us where our SIDs basically go. So if we take the first one, add me 1M, that shows you that it takes you from 3.3 up to 1500 feet at a maximum speed of 220, a minimum altitude of 2,000 feet by this waypoint, and then it sends you basically down here to the admix waypoint. So basically you go in this direction, follow the blue line around here, get to 2,000 feet or more by BB21. From BB20, from this waypoint here, you can go up to 250, and then you carry on down, and there the double lines say that at that waypoint there, Admex, you must be at 6,000 feet, no higher, no lower. Okay. But that's, seeing as our flight plan means going up this way, going down here to Admex is completely the wrong direction. So, let's not... Let's choose a different departure which gets us closer to where we want to go. Now it's saying here that Leuven 1M actually takes us to the waypoint Leuven. Says there. And it's a northerly direction. Now if we look at our flight plan, ooh, how handy is that? Leuven is the first waypoint on our flight plan. So, if we select that, there we go. Now that's much more like it. It goes off from 33, and it tells us, because that line underneath the 1500, we must, by that waypoint, we must be at 1,500 feet or more, which is no problem at all for a 737, but we've got to maintain a maximum of 250 KIAS, or indicated airspeed. But it will then take us north, a bearing of 008. By BBN 32 we've got to be above 5,000, and when we hit Leuven we've got to be at exactly 6,000 feet, and then we will be spot on heading north in the right direction for our flight plan. So that's all lovely and jubbly. So we're going to set that in EFB as our flight plan. Boom. So if we go back now to our FMC, we're taking off from runway 33, and we're going to be going to Leuven 1M as our SID. And you can see here that it's then programmed it into the flight plan. So if you change the view of the ATIS, which I can't remember where it is on this plan. Oh, it's up here. So if we go to our flight plan, there you can see we switch to the route legs. You can see that that's all been programmed with the minimum altitude restrictions into our flight plan, and that's all in there. So that is fantastic. Okay, so we'll go back to our map view. Okay, so that's our departure booked in. Let's go back into those performance settings. So now we can do the takeoff. And it's a big runway at Birmingham, so we can tell the aircraft we're going to use 5 degrees of flap on takeoff, and it'll know from here, it'll know our centre of gravity on takeoff, which will be 25.7%. And because it's got centre of gravity, it now knows how much to trim out the elevator trims. And we've also got V1 rotate and V2 speeds, V1 being the last speed at which we can safely come to a halt on the runway after we've reached 133 knots on the takeoff roll. Then we're basically committed to rotating and taking off. It's safer to actually take off than it is to try and stop after we've reached 133 knots. Okay, so we have a plan. What we're going to do is we're going to tell the aircraft that on takeoff we want to get to about 190 knots, which is about as much as as fast as you want to go with any flaps on. So we'll set it to 190 knots so that it gets nice and up to speed, and we can switch on the auto throttle quite early in the flight, just after we've lifted off, and it will accelerate us up to 190 knots, and then stop there. It will throttle back the engines at that point, and we'll also tell it that we're going. We had a 6,000 feet restriction at Leuven, if you remember. Now, although the FMC will take care of that automatically, it's good practice to actually program that in so that you don't say you haven't executed the flight plan correctly or something like that. That'll make sure you don't end up going outside of your altitude restrictions. And we're more or less prepped to start getting ready to push back. Okay, so we'll assume our passengers have loaded. Oops, ground services, doors. So close up all the doors. Remove the chocks. Now we can actually start to fire the aircraft up. Now, in real life, you don't actually fire up the engines actually on the stand, especially with the jetway there. You actually fire them up while the pushback tug is pushing you back. So we will do exactly that. So let's just get all our hydraulic systems connected and our APU started. These are all the window heaters and mist clearers. That's our main electronic hydraulics. Those winding up. We want our fuel pumps. I don't think we've got any fuel in the centre tank, so we'll only need 2 little fuel pumps on. Let's fire them up. Magic. Okay, now we want a bleed. To start the engines, you use the auxiliary power unit to blow air through the engines to simulate it starting to actually move forward, to actually get the thing spinning. So we'll switch our feed from our... oh no, we haven't got the APU started yet, so we'll do that first. Here's the APU switch here. Okay, and start the thing. And there you go, you can see your APU dial starting to spin up there. Now the APU, as well as providing air pressure, it also provides hydraulic and electrical power as well. Useful things. Okay. So let that just settle down. Let's turn our FMC off. Don't need that for a minute. Okay, now you can see we have power available to the aircraft on the APU. So we'll switch the aircraft over to the APU power on the electrical side. And what we'll also do is we'll switch on the feed from the APU to the engines so that we can start fire up, and you can see there it indicates we've now got air pressure to the engines ready to start. We'll disconnect our ground power. And we're good to go. Now this is brilliant in X-Plane. You haven't got this in FSX. Not nearly as good anyway. It's a thing called better pushback. Watch this. Actually tells you actually get to plan where you put your aircraft. If I actually ask for
ground to cockpit, please show me where you want to go.
There we go. Now here, I think that's the A42 there. So we can't go that way. So what we'll do, here's the centre line of the taxiway there. So we'll tell it, we want him to spin the aircraft round to point that way and push us back that far. Okay.
Ground to cockpit, tow is driving up.
Okay. Now at this point you would have your strobes on and your logo off. Your anti-collision light would be on. I think we don't put the wing lights on until we've fired up our engines. So there's our pushback tow.
Okay, all doors and hatches are closed, ready to connect.
Now I suppose we would have started our transponder, so let's switch the transponder on and set it at 2000 just for now. Doesn't matter because we're not flying online, but it's good practice to do everything right wherever you can. Can you see it's lifting the nose of the aircraft up a little bit?
Tow connected and bypass pin inserted. Release parking brake.
Actually lifted the nose of the thing. Love that. Right. It's told us to release our parking brake, so we will do that.
Starting pushback, and you may start engines.
Okay, so we've got clearance to start our engines. So on the 7.3 we start engine 1 first. And then we'll use a feed from engine 1 to start engine 2. Okay. So once you get above 20 degrees on our N1 intake, we can then open up the fuel supply to engine 2. Engine 1, sorry. Okay, so engine 1 spools up. And the switch goes back from ground start to auto. So now we will set our isolation valve to automatic so that air goes from engine 1 to engine 2. Start the ground starts for engine 2, and that will do exactly the same. Start spooling up. And once we've got over 20 degrees of N1 temp, we can then open up the fuel supply to engine 2, and that will fire itself up as well. Lovely day here at Birmingham. Okay, 2 good starts. So let's switch our electrical power from the APU onto the engine power supplies. That seems to have gone across nicely.
Operation complete. Set parking brake.
Okay, Tug's telling us to put the parking brake on, so we will help him out with that.
Disconnecting toes. Stand by.
While he's doing that, I'll switch the APU off because we no longer need it. And after a couple of minutes that will sink to 0. And we're now autonomous. Now I dare say at this point the passengers would quite like some air conditioning, so I'll connect that up to the engines. Acknowledge the hand signals from the tug. Trim air just to make sure that our windscreens are properly defrosted. And we are good to go. We'll set our pressurization.
Cell is disconnected and bypass pin has been removed. Hand signal on the left. We'll see you next time and have a safe flight.
To 28,000 feet. Switch on our yaw damper so that we don't get don't drift about while we're in flight. Now at this point the temptation is to go off to your runway. You do still have some configuration to do. We don't do this before we start the engines because we want the engines to provide the hydraulic power, but we do at this point. We set our flaps, which is going to be 5. See the little indicator there. Just wait, make sure it gets to make sure that indicator is to 5 degrees. A flap. Okay. Also want to make sure our barrow setting is correct, which it's not at the minute. It shows us showing us here that we're actually beneath the ground at the standard barrow setting, so that barrow setting is wrong. I can look it up. If I go back to my Enabler Soft, so if I go to link screen 2, here we go. We should have a QNH of 1017. So we will just adjust that up. And there you can see we're now at the right altitude for the current pressure setting. Switch on some lights. Now we're not actually switching on our landing lights, we're just extending them so that they're ready for when we take off. Switching on our wing light.
Flight attendant spare for takeoff, please.
Okay. And the last thing we do is we set our automatic braking system. Now that is this little switch here, the auto brake setting, which we will set to RTO, which is rejected to take off. So that's armed. Right, we've now done everything a good pilot should do before he even leaves the gate. So let's taxi down to 33. We'll need the brake off for that. Just a little bit of engine power just to get us rolling. Check everything works, which it seems to be. That's not very handy, is it? I think we're going in the right direction here. Oh no, not this again. Okay, so we're down here at 33. Assuming we get clearance.
Approaching 3-3.
Now, although we have got more runway here, that line just to our left there indicates where the actual operational start and end of the runway is, and we're not allowed to take off or land outside of those boundaries.
On runway 3-3.
Okay. Okay, so we're nice and lined up on the centre line for our runway. We've got flaps. All our radios are working. The lights are on. I'll just brighten that up a little bit. There we go. Not using anti-ice, but otherwise we're all ready to go. Okay. I forget where the TO config button is here, but I think we're okay. Right. Okay, so arm our auto throttles, arm our flight directors.
On runway 3-3. On runway 3-3.
Remind ourselves of our V1 speed, which is 133. And ramp up the power. Ooh, we're not quite straight, so we'll just apply a bit of rudder to straighten ourselves up. That's better. Okay, 80 knots.
80 knots.
100 knots. V1 and rotate coming.
V1, rotate.
Okay, pull back on the stick and up we go. Lovely. We have a positive rate, which means we're safe to retract our landing gear. Yay.
$400.
Okay, so we're going quite nicely up to 400 knots. And what we'll do is we'll engage our autopilot in VNAV and LNAV modes. And I'll tell you about those more in a second. We'll start retracting our flaps. Okay. We are good to go. The aircraft now will do its thing. Nice high rate of climb. We've got well above 1500 before our first waypoint. The next waypoint here, BBN 32, we have to be above 5,000 feet, and we're going to make that easily. See, VNAV is keeping our speed nicely to 250.
To go.
Okay, now remember we've got that restriction at that further waypoint that we've already set to 6,000. It's picked that up here, so when we hit there you'll see it'll throttle back. So there it's throttled back, and it's now going to just sit at 6,000 till it passes that waypoint. Okay. Look out the window now if we want. See, there's our waypoint, Leuven, which we've got to be at 6,000 feet dead when we pass it.
Altimeter setting.
Now, it's given me that because our transition altitude, where we go from the local pressure to standard pressure, is, strictly speaking, 6,000 feet. So if we've gone past that, it's just letting us know, as soon as we're transitioning to an airway now, we should be at standard pressure. So we can do that. Standard pressure, Bob's your uncle. Let's see, it's kept us at 6,000 feet because it's clever enough to know we're still on the SID. And so we passed Leuven. There you go. And as we pass it, let's put in our new altitude, which is 28,000 feet, as I recall. Why? Oh yeah, here we go. Now it's happy to resume the climb, and off we go. Now we've passed, no we have not passed 10,000 feet, so we should not be going that quickly. So it'll actually lift the nose to wipe off some airspeed there until we reach 10,000. Here we go, coming up on 10,000. 98, 99, 10,000 feet. Now at this point, you'll notice that the vertical speed drops and the nose drops as well, so that the plane can now accelerate to 290 knots. And now we can really start motoring.
Ladies and gentlemen, the seatbelt sign will be switched off shortly. However, for health and safety, we recommend that you keep your seatbelt loosely fastened in case of any unexpected turbulence. We have an excellent team on board today, and we are all happy to
Switch and retract all our lights.
Our in-flight entertainment has begun.
Flight position. The logo light. And off we go. And now the plane will just do a pre-programmed climb. Oh, it's 240. Ha 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 ha. Forgot about that. Top of climb should be 30 nautical miles. You can see our next waypoint there, TNT. Climbing up to 24,000 feet. Standard barrow pressure. Everything in the world is good. Okay, so let's have a look at Aversoft to see how we're going. And you can see here, zoom in a little bit. Let's get rid of that. Just past Trent. But already, since this is a short flight, we should already be thinking about what we'll be doing in terms of landing. And let's have a look at our arrivals page to do that. Okay, just the one at runway Edinburgh, 2406. And if we have a look at our weather, the wind's coming from 250, so to land into the wind, we want to be as close to 250 as we can. It's 10 knots, fairly decent headwind into there. So as you can see, yeah. We don't even get a verified. That's takeoff and landing is definitely 2-4. So we're going to choose 2-4. We're going to use the ILS approach. There's other approaches we could use, but obviously ILS is way the safest. Okay, so now we've selected that, you can see it paints in the feathers, and I'll show you what I mean by feathers. That there is the ILS feather, which tells you
1,000 to go.
roughly the zone which narrows as you approach the runway. And down here you also have your glide slope, and this is all very useful. It tells us that to enter the ILS you've got to be at 3,000 feet or above at that waypoint. And the same is confirmed here. So the line underneath says that is the lowest point, at the lowest altitude you can enter the pattern on. And it says at, here it says at 2.8 miles from ITH, you've got to be at exactly 1,060 feet. Okay. And it's also telling us that our course is 241, and that's actually the direction the runway is set at. So our course is 241, and our frequency for the ILS is 10890. and it will actually tell you, if you've tuned it correctly, it'll actually tell you that you're tuned to Indigo Tango Hotel. Okay, so that's our landing. Let's just get rid of all that. Okay, so how are we going to approach that? Well, we have the stars here, and if we look at our flight plan, the last waypoint is Inpip, and conveniently there is here a star which takes you from Inpip to Tartan from the south. So let's have a look at that. Now you'll notice on this particular star, it isn't actually taking us to the airport. It's only taking us about 50 miles south of the airport. And that's because Edinburgh is slightly unusual because the wind changes direction off the fourth there. It changes so often that very often they need to change which is the active runway from 240. They need to switch it very quickly. So controllers will pick you up at this point and actually give you vectors, which is kind of like what FSX does. By vectors, that's heights and directions to get you onto the ILS. So that is what we're going to do, but we're going to make our own vectors up instead of listening to some idiot. And basically all we're going to do is we're going to go from Tartan, carry on. What was I doing? There we go. We're going to carry on from Tartan up in this direction, maybe go out this way a little bit and then circle round to get to that point there. So we'll show you that in a minute. When we actually get there, we're going to set that as our flight plan. So that's roughly what we plan to do. And as you can see, we're already past Blackpool and heading up, so it will not be long before we're getting near our destination. So let's switch back to the sim. And let's show you how we plan that into the FMC. Okay, so we go to the departures and arrivals page. Go to EGPH arrivals. We're going to be using the ILS 24 approach. Excellent. And we decided we were going to use Tartan Star. Now, where's that? Oh, in it. One Echo, wasn't it? So there we go. What we'll do is we'll execute that. Now if we have a look at our legs, we can see that's we're just coming up to Gab. Next one will be at Shap, up in the Lake District. Abbeville. And then InPip. Now this is one you need to keep your eye on. T/D, which is top of descent. So when you reach that point here, the aircraft is telling you for the most efficient descent, that is the moment where you want to actually start descending. So we go onto our steps, in rev, escadou, turn right to head towards December. Now that's Tartan. And there, if we leave it to the computer itself, it'll take us right up to the start of that descent, that ILS there, which is great. We'll come off navigation to the flight plan, and we'll actually put vector straight into our heading up here. But left to its own devices, that's what the airplane's gonna do. Okay. So. Now let's have a look at the progress page on here, and it's saying we've got 43 miles left to run before top descent. We've got that there. It'll even give you the time that you should be starting to descend. So we'll get to Urgab, we'll get to Shap at 11:20, and 11:24 we want to start descending. Of course, in FSX you'll get that from your traffic controller, and if you're flying on VATSIM, your controllers would roughly know from which aircraft that's what you want to do anyway. So, you know, you'd follow their instructions. A couple of bits of housekeeping to do. I'm going to switch it. Switch the auto brakes to auto brake 2. It's quite a short runway actually, we've got quite a lot of passengers. I'm going to put it up at 3, which will probably feel like the heads are taken off when we land, but we want to stop properly. So that is auto brake up to 3. And And basically we're keeping an eye on the MFD here, waiting for our top of descent to pop in. Yeah, 31 miles to go, as you can see from the FMC there. Right, let's just go over the capture of the ILS again. So if we go back to here, okay. Now what we'll do for this approach is, if we switch our little marker program back on again. Ah, go away. So what we're going to do is when we reach Tarn here, we're going to switch from GPS navigation in FSX. We're going to switch to just taking headings on the autopilot, which we'll get from our air traffic controller, and that's what they call a vectored approach. You can see that the star actually ends here and turns into an approach. So in FSX, the ATC will probably tell you to go something like there, then turn right, take you up here a bit, and then bring you something like there, because, and that we're going to do roughly the same, because what you want to do if I just switch that off for a second, what you want to do have we hit top of descent? I think we have, haven't we? No. What I'm just going to show you just before, we'll carry that on in just a second. But we have top of descent there coming up soon. So what we're going to do is tell the aircraft, the autopilot, that it's basically okay to descend to 3,000 feet. So I've adjusted that on the altitude marker there, and when it hits top of descent, it will automatically start descending. That's the joy of VNav. You don't have to figure out what your vertical speed rates are or anything. The aircraft just handles the whole damn thing. Why is my auto throttle just come off? We'll just sit and watch it do that actually, because it's quite fun to watch. Somewhere over Carlisle at the minute. There we go. It's hit. And you can see now that it's automatically started the descent. And if we have a look at this, that magenta marker there is the marker of where it's planned our descent. So that's the path of our descent. If that marker is up here, that means we're below our planned glide slope, and if it's down here, that means we're above it, we need to descend quicker, or if it is up here, we need to descend slower. But we're pretty much bang on the money here. What we are doing is accelerating very quickly, so we need to get hold of that. We need to get on some. So I've put our air brakes on. It does look like we're going to have to or have we got a master caution? Dunno. Anyway, let's use the vertical speed. Okay. Yeah, as I was saying, you want to hit the ILS at roughly a 45-degree angle, so you want to be coming in at that angle there, so that when you eventually hit the ILS, you'll get a marker down here, and in this case it should start, you should see a little magenta marker there, and when it starts moving in towards the center, that means you've captured the ILS. So okay, we need to be getting down faster than this. Okay, so let's program in our radios. Our ILS radio should be, let's just, ILS mode 10890, so we'll change that. And we'll do that on the second one as well, ILS 10890, switch that out. And the course is 241. So let's get that in 241 and 241. Now these do need to be set because this is how the aircraft knows which direction the runway is pointing. So if it thinks it's a degree off, by the end of it you'll be coming off one side of the runway, which you don't want to do. Okay. Apparently we're not supposed to be going below 7,000 here. So we'll set 7,000 back in there. So if we go back to here, I reckon we want to be going at away from Tartan at around about 45, heading of 45, so that's sort of in that direction, off to the right basically. Our current heading is 007. Let's slow down a little bit. Let's get up to 20. Okay, we can put a bit of flap on. Okay, so we've hit Tartan. So let's go away from Tartan at 45 degrees. You can see the magenta heading there. So let's go into heading select mode. And there we go. The aircraft turns to the right and follows our aircraft heading. Can increase the range on our EFD just to see roughly what we're doing. Let's get down to 3,000 feet. Which is the level which we've been told by the charts we need to be at. Now we can see here that it's picking up some kind of ILS frequency, but it's IVG, and it knows from the FMC that that's wrong. So it's stroke it through there. Okay, it's also telling us that our barrow pressure is wrong. That's right, because we're below 6,000 feet. So let's do something about that one. I'm told the QNH is 1014. So if we Edinburgh, so we'll set that to 1014.
Altimeter setting.
What do you mean altimeter setting? Okay. Oh, bugger off. That one all the time. So, as you can see, we're all prepped.
Thousand to go.
We're nearly down to 3,000 feet. Set our barrow up, and you can see here we're heading, that's the ILS going in that direction there, and we're going that way. So in a minute we're going to try and turn it around so that we attack the ILS at a roughly 45-degree angle. So let's go on and do that, shall we? I reckon that's roughly what? Somewhere between the 300 and 280. Let's do a turn to 300 and see what that effect that has. So let's turn it. Now at this point, this is the point where you need to make sure that you've switched from GPS to nav. I'm going to slow down a little bit as well. Okay. So now we're ideal. You can see that it's picked up ITH as the ILS. We're 18.5 miles away from it. We're underneath the glide slope, as you can see here. So it's above our centre marker. That's exactly where we want to be. And our direction marker is off to the right hand side, again because we are approaching the ILS from the left here. There you go. So when we're actually
Altimeter
getting towards
setting.
that centre line, you should see this magenta marker heading towards the centre. Okay. Okay, we can start to put a bit of flap on. Okay, there is even an approach mode that gives you this in even finer detail. You've got the see this bit here. There's your vertical direction, and there's your ILS path there. Okay, now we have a very useful thing called the app or approach button. Just that button there. So as soon as we intercept the ILS, we just hit that approach button and it'll do all the rest of the work for us. Coming in at that at quite an angle, so I'm just going to do a little bit of a left turn just to shallow the angle a little bit. Otherwise we're going to come into it too fast. There we go, it's lit up. So we hit the approach button and the aircraft will now turn itself onto the ILS. Start heading towards the airport nice and aligned. We've also just had the glide slope indicator light up, and that's now going to gradually, as we get onto the glide slope, if I show you what I mean there. As we get onto the glide slope, that will start correcting our pitch, our throttle and everything. Now, we've forgotten to do one little thing, and that is our approach speed, which on this one, I'll take it in at 30, so we're going to be flaps 30 and touchdown at 143 knots. That's our VREF speed. Forgot to do that. Shouldn't have forgotten. Okay. Let's assume we've got clearance for landing, so let's stick out our landing gear. put on a bit more flap. Now, at this point, you can hit the second autopilot and it'll take it in for a fully automated landing. But that's no fun. We're going to fly it in by hand because that's what real pilots do. So, disengage that. Turn off our auto throttles. Okay. Whack a bit more flap on. Okay.
Feet, stabilize, Mr. Birch, altitude set.
Okay. We're below the glide slope, so we're going to add a little bit more power.
Approaching 2-4.
And just try and keep those. We're a little bit quick. Just going to raise the nose a little bit. There we go. Too white, too red. On the slope indicators. Gone a bit below, so add a bit more power.
Light slow. Light slow.
Okay, we've gone a bit
Light
too
slow.
far below glide slope, so we're just going to whack on a bit of power. There we go. Lovely. And just gradually
Approaching Minimos.
just bring her off to the right a little bit. There we go.
100.
Lovely.
Minimums.
Okay.
50, 40, 30, 20.
Okay, take off the power and bring the nose
Yeah.
up for a nice flare. There we go. Full reverse thrust
80 knots.
until we're down to 80 knots, and then the brakes will take care of the rest. And there we go. That, ladies and gentlemen, is how you do an ILS approach landing.
We'll be taxiing for the next few minutes, so please remain seated with your seatbelt fastened and all items stowed until the seatbelt sign is turned off. Please make
Okay.
sure you have all your personal belongings
Get rid of our
before you
flaps.
exit the aircraft, and be careful when opening the overhead compartment. You're now free to use your mobile phones and small
Retract our
lightweight
speed
devices.
brakes.
Thank you for flying with us today. We hope you
Turn
had a
on our
pleasant experience,
APU.
and we look forward to welcoming you again on another flight.
Was that fun? I'm going to brag here a little bit. Look at that landing rate. Okay. there's the directions to gate 5 there. And I'll go in at gate 4 because that is the last gate I flew from. Last time I flew from Edinburgh. Oh. Roughly, that should be should be nice. Okay, chuck on my parking brake. Switch the electrics over to the APU, which we've, for a change, remembered to start. And cut off the engines.
Flight attendants prepare for takeoff, please.
Okay, the cabin is secured. Have a good flight.
Now, why isn't it? Got my brakes on. It's not because of my APU, is it? I do not know why that is. That should be automatically connecting. Oh well. Not to worry. Hope you enjoyed that.